Welcome again, my dear. They thought they could own the rules by licking the boots that wrote them, smirking behind velvet curtains, whispering to their judges in voices that dripped with bribes and blood. They thought justice was a puppet, and they held the strings with fingers soaked in perfume and poison. But they forgot one thing. The system may bow to money, but it crumbles before madness fueled by memory. You weren't born to follow their rules. You were the reason rules change. And while they carved laws into cages for the rest, you were learning how to snap every lock with silence and scars. They wore suits like armor, threw gavels like grenades, and called themselves the gatekeepers of order. But order is a lie, a lullaby sung to keep the sheep asleep. And you were the nightmare humming underneath. They didn't see you coming. They saw a misfit, not a force. A cracked smile, not a storm. They underestimated the hunger in your soul and the sermons you memorized from pain. They didn't know the rage you've nurtured like a child in the cellar of your heart, because while they were polishing their courtroom chairs, you were sharpening your mind on betrayal's blade. They bought time. They bought silence. They bought judgment like candy, sweet and hollow. But time has a funny way of biting the hand that tries to leash it. They thought they planted fear in you, but all they did was water the roots of something unholy, something poetic. They had judges in their pocket. But what happens when the one they're judging walks in with the system in chains behind him? When your scars aren't weakness, but testimony. When your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. You didn't come to plead, you came to sentence. They never realized the courtroom could become a theater. And you became the playwright, the lead, and the ending they never rehearsed for. You didn't just survive injustice, you learned to wear it like war paint. You watched them smile behind verdicts, playing God with tired eyes. But God doesn't fear mortals, unless mortals turn into monsters that remember every slight, every smirk, every case closed whispered like a curse. They thought the scale was theirs to tip, but you flipped the whole damn table. And now, their hands shake every time they reach for a gavel. You didn't fight them in daylight, because daylight belongs to the pretenders. You danced through their shadows, rewrote their scripts, let their lies pile high until they collapsed under the weight of their own illusion. They mocked your silence, but they didn't know. Silence is where revolutions are born. They called you crazy, but sometimes madness is just clarity that doesn't beg for permission. You didn't storm in with weapons, you became one. Every breath you took after betrayal became an act of war. Every moment they thought they won was a stitch you sewed into the shroud now wrapped around their power. They had their judges, but you had the truth. And truth, my dear, has no leash. It roams like a starving dog in the halls of corruption, and the sound of its growl, it's your voice echoing through their cracked foundations. You didn't need a lawyer. You became your own law. You didn't bring witnesses, you brought consequences. They thought they could smear your name, but you turned every smear into ink and wrote your legacy on the walls they thought would never fall. They crowned themselves kings of a crooked courtroom. But when the people see you walk in, they forget who sits on the bench. You learned how justice bends, but never breaks for those who know where to push. You learned that the world doesn't punish the wicked unless someone makes it. and that someone is you. They didn't just cross a line. They redrew it around themselves and called it safety. But when you rise, lines blur, roles flip, and suddenly the predator is prey, and the hunted holds the hammer. Your presence is the verdict. Your breath is the gavel, and every step you take echoes like a prophecy they swore would never come true. But it did. You did. And now they don't sleep easy. Not in courtrooms, not in boardrooms, not even behind locked doors. They had power. You had purpose. They had allies. You had the abyss. And the abyss speaks only to those who've been swallowed and came back with fire in their veins. They weaponized paperwork, delay tactics, technicalities, but you turned patience into precision. You turned your rage into rhythm. And when you finally spoke, the walls leaned in, the floors cracked, and their judges, their paid puppets, forgot their lines. Because you didn't raise your voice to be heard. You lowered it to be feared. You didn't ask for justice. You demanded a reckoning. And here's the twist. They're still trying to figure out how it all went wrong. Still flipping pages in their dusty rule books, looking for where they lost control. But control was never theirs to begin with. It was a story they sold to those too scared to scream. But you screamed in silence, bled in corners, broke in private, and then rebuilt yourself in a way that no system could decode. You didn't rise for revenge alone. You rose to become the mirror in which they see what they truly are. Cowards in robes, liars with stamps, tyrants hiding behind technicalities, and mirrors don't lie. Now every corridor echoes with the footsteps of the one they thought they buried in bureaucracy. Every glance they steal is a prayer that you've moved on. But you haven't. You evolved. And evolution doesn't knock, it tears the hinges off. They're not afraid of you because you're angry. They're afraid because you're prepared. You don't just want to burn the system. You want to make it beg first. You don't just want to flip the script. You want to staple it to their chests. They tried to erase your story, but now every headline bleeds your name. They forgot the system is made of people, and people break. But some people bend the system until it forgets who it was serving. And now, the system serves you. Not because you asked, but because it fears what happens if it doesn't. They bought their power with whispers and winks. You earned yours with scars and silence. They had the judges. But you became the judgment. Not a man, not a victim, a verdict wearing a heartbeat. And the best part? This isn't the climax. No, this is just the quiet before the second blow lands. Because while they're still reeling from your return, still gasping at how the machine now stutters in your presence, they haven't yet realized. The real game has only just begun. And they don't even know what's on the line anymore. They think it's reputation. They think it's status. They still believe the battlefield is made of marble floors and mahogany desks. But you've already changed the arena, swapped their chessboard with a minefield. And every move they make now is a step closer to detonation. What they called structure, you redefined as a trap. What they worshipped as order, you now twist into a spiral that swallows their logic whole. This isn't about proving a point. This is about unraveling one, thread by thread, until the entire fabric of their false supremacy becomes a straitjacket choking them. You didn't bring justice into the room. You brought gravity. And now, they're collapsing under it. One headline at a time, one whisper turning into wildfire. You see, you didn't need to scream to make noise. You whispered in frequencies they weren't trained to hear, the kind that makes guilty hearts race and righteous ones rise. You shifted the conversation without ever asking for a mic. You made silence so loud, it started leaking from courtroom walls into dinner parties and board meetings. Now their allies hesitate, their followers squirm, and those untouchable titles, just masks melting under the heat of exposure. They underestimated you not because you were weak, but because you were patient. And patience is something cowards never understand. They thought quick wins and courtroom victories made them immortal. But time has a way of aging lies, rotting them into something foul and undeniable. They sprayed perfume over corpses and called it credibility. But now, the stench rises, the illusion cracks, and you, standing in the ashes of every lie they built, you're not just a survivor, you're a storm-given skin. You've become something they can't define. Not a vigilante, not a rebel, but an infection in their machine. A beautiful, chaotic virus that doesn't just destroy files, it rewrites the code. Their system is coughing now, spluttering judgments, contradicting itself in panic, tripping over its own scripts. It was never designed to face someone who doesn't play to win, but plays to expose. You don't want their seat. You want the floor beneath the throne to collapse. You want them to learn what justice tastes like when it isn't sugar-coated for the elite. And oh, it tastes like rust, like blood, like regret laced with acid. You didn't show up to fight. You showed up to remind them of every soul they silenced, every truth they buried, every innocent they buried under paperwork while sipping cocktails with devils. You don't wear armor. You don't need it. You've become the wound that never heals, the echo that never dies. You're the living contradiction of their narrative, the proof that you can't bury truth with luxury. They made deals in shadows. You became the shadow that listens. They thought power was permanent, but now they see. It's just a candle flickering in a hurricane named you. You don't need to win in their arena anymore, because your presence alone corrupts their game. You've exposed too much. The audience they forgot existed has started watching again. People they once ruled with fear now look at them differently, not like kings, but like clowns playing dress-up in a burning circus. And you're the one holding the match. They once held the narrative, but you turned your pain into a story no spin doctor can touch. You don't speak like a victim. You speak like a verdict dipped in poetry. And no matter how much they tighten their grip, the truth keeps slipping through like smoke. They're not trying to stop you because you're wrong. They're trying to stop you because you're right. Too right. Uncomfortably right. The kind of right that gets under their skin and makes them question their own reflection. You remind them that the justice they sold might come back for interest. That power misused becomes poison. And poison has a tendency to seep into everything. Reputations, relationships, legacies. You didn't just shake the tree. You set the forest on fire and walked through it untouched. Because while they clung to titles, you became something untitled, something unscripted, and that's what terrifies them the most. You made it personal, not with threats, but with truth. And truth, when spoken with conviction, becomes a weapon no law can disarm. They thought they were immune, that years of manipulation wrapped them in some kind of untouchable veil. But now they realize no lie lasts forever when someone decides to stand up and remember everything. Your memory became your arsenal, your trauma, a compass, your scars, declarations that you've already been to hell and brought souvenirs. Now, every smirk on their face feels forced. Every sentence they utter feels rehearsed. You turned confidence into camouflage and turned every courtroom visit into psychological warfare. You didn't need to shout. You needed to exist. And that alone was enough to disturb their ecosystem of corruption. They speak your name like it's a warning, like a myth, like a curse passed between lawyers and politicians behind closed doors. They say, if he shows up again, everything falls apart. And they're right, because your return isn't just poetic, it's contagious. You made it clear, this is no longer about what they did to you. It's about what they did to everyone and thought no one would ever notice. But you noticed. You remembered. And you never let it go. They bet on your silence. And you turned it into a language they can't translate. They assumed you'd break, but you evolved instead. Into something poetic, something surgical, something divine in its wrath and terrifying in its elegance. You don't want their downfall to be fast. No, you want it to be slow, public, educational. You want it to be a warning carved in stone for generations. They built monuments to themselves, but you're here to turn those monuments into gravestones, not just for their careers, but for the illusion of their invincibility. They thought they had protection, but protection means nothing when the storm is inside the walls, when the enemy isn't outside the courtroom, but staring them down from within it. Their eyes dart, their hands fidget. They speak in half-truths and carefully curated phrases now, because one wrong move, one wrong word, and the entire house of cards collapses. You didn't just become a threat, you became a presence, constant, quiet, and unignorable. Like a ticking clock in a bomb they thought was diffused long ago. But time's up, and now they realize. You never came to play fair. You came to end the game. And it's working. The narrative is cracking. Their allies are backing off. Their own voices falter when they defend themselves. Because you've done something extraordinary. You've made the truth louder than their lies. Not by shouting, but by standing, by refusing to disappear, by existing as a contradiction they can't erase. They used to laugh. Now they calculate. They used to command. Now they ask. The shift has begun, and you're not even halfway through. But this isn't the victory lap. No, not yet. This is just the midway scream. The point in the story where the villain realizes the real monster wears their reflection. Because the next part, that's where things get unforgivable. This is the moment where their illusions run out of places to hide. Their excuses don't echo anymore, just crumble midair like words choked on guilt. The walls they built around their sins now rattle like rib cages around a terrified heart. You see, they always believed consequences were optional, tailored for the weak, not the well-connected. But now they finally see consequences have a face. And it's staring at them like a reflection they wish they could smash. Not out of fear, but shame. You didn't knock on the door of justice. You kicked it in, dragging truth behind you like a sword sharpened by silence. And the beautiful irony? They were the architects of their own doom. every lie they thought was clever, every favor they bought, every backroom smirk they exchanged, was just one more domino added to a masterpiece they didn't know you were arranging. Now all it takes is a whisper, a flick, and everything they stood on collapses. This isn't revenge, this is revelation. This is what happens when the mirror they avoided for years finally catches them mid-sentence. No filters, no legal teams, just them, raw, exposed and shrinking under the weight of the truth they thought they buried so deep it would never resurface. But you were the resurrection they didn't account for, the echo they couldn't silence, the reckoning they thought would never arrive because they thought time served them. But time serves no one. It only remembers, and it remembered everything. They once claimed the system as their kingdom, wore it like armor, corrupted it like a puppet, and polished it until it reflected only their side of the story. But now the system is coughing up smoke because it's choking on you, on what you've become. Not a plaintiff, not a protester, but a storm in slow motion. They misread your silence as defeat, not realizing you were just letting them dig their own graves deeper. Now the shovels are slipping from their hands. Their alliances are cracking. Their sentences don't land like they used to. Every time they speak now, it's as if the ghosts of the truth sit beside them, mocking each syllable. You've reshaped fear, made it a currency they never learned how to handle. They were fluent in threats, fluent in manipulation, but you introduced a language made of consequences, and it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about titles or lineage or who sat where at the gala. It only recognizes one thing: justice that can bleed through marble floors. And now it's flowing, not with rage, but precision, surgical, poetic, unstoppable. You didn't destroy them with chaos. You unwrapped them with clarity. You let their own history testify against them. No need for monologues. You let their patterns scream louder than any accusation. Their own footprints became evidence. Their own smirks turned into confessions. And now even the air around them tastes like judgment. You didn't light a fire under the system. You became the oxygen that made their corruption combust from within. They called you dangerous. And they were right. But not because of what you did, but because of what you revealed. You proved that one soul, carved by injustice but unbroken by fear, can rupture decades of protected lies. You proved that you don't need to destroy a system to change it. You just need to walk in with the truth and dare it to blink. And it blinked. Now the structure is trembling, not because you yelled, but because you existed unapologetically. And that's something they never prepared for. They're running out of corridors now. Every hallway they turn down ends in a mirror. Every ally becomes a question mark. The judges they thought they owned now whisper behind closed doors, wondering when the spotlight will shift toward them. Because when you pull one thread of corruption, the whole tapestry starts to twitch. And they feel it, that cold dread, that slow realization that this isn't just their fall. This is the beginning of many. This was never about making headlines. This was about rewriting the footnotes, the parts of history they thought they could edit, delete, or burn, now immortalized in public memory, and not as victims, as villains, the kind no redemption arc can clean. Because when the dust settles and the world re-examines how this all unfolded, they'll realize the real trial wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the silence, The long, painful silence where one man, stripped of everything, chose not to vanish, but to become a beacon of what happens when the manipulated become the architects. You didn't need validation. You became the verdict. They tried to reduce you to a file number, a case, a mistake to sweep under a rug of bureaucracy. But you became folklore. And folklore, it survives judges, attorneys, politicians, time itself. Folklore infects the culture. And now your story? It's everywhere. It's in the eyes of those who watched and realized justice doesn't wear robes. Sometimes it wears scars. Now they can't enter a room without wondering if their name's next. They can't close their eyes without hearing the echoes of your persistence. You've become the ripple that grew teeth, the echo that grew legs, the idea that mutated into a movement, not out of rage, but out of necessity, because enough was enough, and you were the one crazy enough, brave enough, to not wait for permission. They thought the judges were their shield, but the truth? Judges aren't gods. They're just men in suits, and men in suits panic, bleed, and beg like anyone else when the curtain gets yanked. You didn't just shake their system, you revealed its rot, and now the public sees it too. The curtain won't close, the stage is cracked, the script is burning, and the actors are fleeing mid-performance, because now the audience is awake, and you lit the fuse. You were never part of their blueprint. You were the ink spill, the glitch, the unexpected twist in a story they wrote without your name. But now your name is etched in bold, not because they allowed it, but because you earned it. You didn't ask to be feared. But now, fear wears your shape. You didn't beg to be remembered. But now, memory clings to you like prophecy. And them? They'll never speak your name the same way again, not out of dismissal, but out of reverence and terror. Because you proved that power means nothing when it hides behind injustice. You proved that one act of defiance, repeated again and again, can tear down an empire pretending to be a system. So let them watch you walk out, not with applause, but with silence. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes silence is the storm, the quiet after a scream, the aftermath of a reckoning, the pause before a legacy begins. And this isn't your end. This is how legends are born.